Since I uploaded my review of the Yonex Nanoflare 1000Z, so many of you have asked for a direct comparison to the other Nanoflares like the 700 and the 800. And so today, to help you all make the right purchase decision, I'll compare all of the high-end Nanoflares together, starting with the 1000Z alongside the 800 and 800 LT before ending with the 700 too. In this comparison, I'm going to focus more on what makes each model unique, such as their racket feel, and try to describe what makes them unique at the same time. Additionally, what the racket is best at and what you need to look out for when buying them. If you like fast rackets, you'll like this video. If you want to learn more about the specs, I have obviously made videos referring to each of the Nanoflare rackets here, so obviously I will link it up here and in the description below for those of you who want a more in-depth look. Also, I'm going to address the elephant in the room for my racket reviews here. First of all, I don't intend to do any form of destructive testing on the rackets I test. I find this really wasteful, so I'd rather focus on the performance of the rackets themselves. If something ever breaks during my testing process, trust me, you will 100% hear about it. Maybe I should ask the car reviews next time about the durabilities of their Ferraris or Porsche next time round. Also, if it's a review video, no brand gets to see any part of my review of their product until they're publicly published. They see it the same time as you do. It's as simple as that. So let's get comparing. The Nanoflare series for Yonex has been incredibly popular with both pros and amateurs alike. The recently launched 1000Z now complements the existing high-end 700, 800 and 800 LT rackets. All four models are designed for speed and are incredibly fast. As per Yonex's usual high-end racket production location, they are all made in Japan. Also, there are three weight categories that these rackets cover. For the Nanoflare 1000Z and 800, they're both available in 3U and 4U weight classes. For the 800 LT, it's only available in the 5U weight class. And for the 700s, they are available in both 4U and 5U weights. And obviously with a heavier racket, they generally feel easier to generate power, but loses out slightly in terms of speed or maneuverability. And for those of you who are familiar with the channel, I generally test rackets in the 4U weight category as that's what I normally play with, so it's a good consistent benchmark for me. However, if there are no 4U options like the Nanoflare 800 LT, then 5U it is. So let's start with the racket feel. In the simplest terms, the 1000Z has the stiffest and crispiest feel. That means it feels sharp and responsive. Repulsion is incredibly high and the shuttle will bounce or shoot off the racket extremely quickly upon contact. Next after that is the 800 and 800 LT. I do think that the 800 and 800 LT do feel similar in terms of the racket feel. They are stiff rackets but also very responsive. Not as stiff or crisp as the 1000Z, but the 800 feels very comfortable and smooth. If you want a scale representation of the crispiness or how sharp and responsive they are, the 1000Z would be around 9 to 9.5 and the 800 and 800 LT at around 8 to 8.5, so not too far behind at all. If we then look at the 700, I find the 700 to be a lot softer in comparison to those three. Yonex rates it as a medium racket, and on my scale I'll put it around 4 to 5, which is pretty soft for me. I personally prefer slightly stiffer rackets with sharper responses. So if you like stiff rackets, the 800 and above models will suit you very much. Now that you know the general feel of these rackets, I want to talk a bit about the racket head. There are two distinct racket frame designs going on across these four rackets. The 700 and 1000Z share a similar design, and the 800 and 800 LT share another similar design. Both frame designs are fairly unique in their own right, with the 800 and 800 LT having the thinnest Yonex Badminton racket frames I've ever come across at only 9.3 and 9.5 millimeters thick, whilst the 700 and 1000Z have one of the thickest Yonex frames at the other end of the spectrum at around 12.4 to 12.7 millimeters. Quite a difference there. From my experience, a thinner frame generally has a smoother swing feeling, whilst a thicker frame feels slightly draggier. But in real world terms, these differences are absolutely minimal. All four rackets swing incredibly fast, so it's just a different feeling. Also, besides the racket frame design, I want to bring your attention to the racket frame size too. For example, the 800, 800 LT and 1000Z have a compact frame size. This means their frames are smaller than usual. The pros of having a smaller head would be faster swing speeds, and cons would be potentially a slightly smaller sweet spot. For reference, the 800, 800 LT and 1000Z has a frame height of about 23.5 centimeters compared to 24 centimeters for the 700. For width, The 800 and 800 LT are the smallest at only 18 centimeters wide, and the 1000Z at 18.5 centimeters, before the 700 coming in at 18.7 centimeters. This makes the 800 and 800 LT having the smallest racket frame on a current generation Yonex Badminton racket. Another reference point for you guys is the Arc Saber 11 Pro, which has a frame width that is even wider than the 700 at 19 centimeters wide, but does share the same height of 24 centimeters. So you can now understand why the Arc Saber 11 Pro is so user-friendly when it probably has the biggest sweet spot of all. So in summary, for the racket head size, the 700 is the biggest with the 1000Z in second, whilst the 800 and 800 LT have the smallest head size. All the Nanoflare racket frames do share a similarity, which is where they have all their frames fully recessed in terms of their profile to hide those protruding grommets for a faster and smoother swing. And talking about racket frames, remember to protect your precious racket frames with these almost invisible premium racket protection tape I've developed at ckYW.com/shop. Protect your rackets and don't let them get hurt. In terms of speed and maneuverability, which is also often equated to defense, this is a really hard one as all of them are incredibly fast when compared to other rackets, say the Arc Saber 11 Pro or my usual Astrox 88D Pro. But amongst themselves, there's still a slight hierarchy for these speed demons. In terms of ultimate speed, I find the 800 LT the fastest, in part due to its 5U weight, then followed closely behind by the 800 in 4U. If you ask why not the 5U Nanoflare 700 behind the 800 LT, I've just felt that it's the 700's slight dragginess that puts it behind the 800's smoothness in terms of pure speed and feel. Clearly this is my personal opinion and you might feel slightly differently. Obviously the 3U 800 loses out to the 4U and 5U 700s in terms of speed, before the 1000Z bringing up the rear. This is due to the 1000Z having the most head weight of all of them, so it's not only natural for it to come last, but certainly well ahead of other head-heavy rackets. Context is really important here. For power, it's almost the opposite of speed due to the head heaviness of the rackets. However, I do want to stress that power generation in badminton is very technical and often down to personal technique, timing and physicality. If you give an advanced player a headlight racket like a Nanoflare 700, he or she will still be able to generate incredible power compared to a weaker player with a super head heavy racket. So the power that I'm trying to describe here is the raw power of the rackets, or in other words, how easy it is to generate power with the racket, which often comes in the form of head heaviness or the racket weight itself. The 1000Z clearly has the most power in this aspect, with it having the most head weight. This would then be followed by the 3U 800 before the 4U 800. We then have the 4U 700 and finally the 800 LT and the 5U 700. I personally find the 800 LT easier for power generation compared to the 5U 700 because I prefer stiffer feeling. But that's completely down to my personal preference and technique. Overall, you can even say the 1000Z is an extra stiff version of the 700. If you're looking for a user-friendly, easy-to-play racket, I would recommend the 700 or 800. Both are super easy to play with, especially if you reduce the tension a little bit on the 800 to compensate for the slightly smaller head. I personally love the 3U 800 so much and I rate it very highly in my book. Many of you who followed my channel from the very beginning will know the backstory of my dilemma, which was me picking my rackets between the 3U Nanoflare 800 or the 4U Astrox 88D Pro when I wanted to swap from my trusty Arc Saber 10s. But because the UK doesn't have the Nanoflare 800 in 3U G5, hence I went with the Astrox 88D Pro in 4U G5. The 5U models for the 800 LT and 700 are super user-friendly beginner rackets, but once you get into the higher levels of play, you might want to have a bit more raw power from these rackets, so make sure you're aware of that and it's down to your personal preference. The 1000Z is probably the least user-friendly in this bunch, obviously as the stiffest and head-heaviest racket, but in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty okay once you get used to the crispy and sharp responsive feeling. I would certainly recommend dropping a pound or two in tension, especially if you're on a stiffer string or a thinner one too. If you want to check out these rackets, go to Central Sports and remember to use my discount code CKYW for some extra discounts too. What's your favourite Yonex Nanoflare Badminton racket? I'll see you in the next one.